Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 30 of the Day Zero podcast. I'm Spectre with MEUZZ. Hard to believe it's been 30 episodes already. So before we jump into topics, we are going to talk about the Cyber MDX topic we covered a few episodes ago. Do you remember the exact episode number?
I don't have that up, but this was the MD Hacks was out of Cyber MDX for the ones that kind of reported that. And they provided there was several issues against GE Health devices. So we had talked about several smart devices. And if you do give me a moment here, that was in episode 26 on looks like the 27th.
Okay.
So during that episode, we just wanted to make a correction, or I guess more of a clarification to one of the points that we had made, which was Spectre and I had both kind of questioned about why there was this disclosure, but it didn't seem like there was a patch available yet. And it turns out that actually on the same day as kind of the main post from Cyber MDX, they did actually kind of release a timeline that included their discussion with CISA, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, but about basically their reporting and kind of how things went back and forth. And essentially what this comes down to is the fact that, Cyber MDX definitely pushed for, not disclosing this before there was a patch actually available and before all of that was out there. But that ended up being a discussion between GE and CISA rather than something that Cyber MDX kind of held towards. So we were kind of questioning that, ended up kind of getting an answer on it. So I figured I'd bring it up during this episode.
Yeah, we wanted to be a bit more charitable just because, when we were talking about that, it could have been interpreted that we were kind of, criticizing them for releasing it before a patch was available. But, through this timeline, like you were just saying.
Yeah, I mean, on that episode, I think it was clear that, something was going on that we just weren't kind of aware of. And that happens to be exactly what was going on.
Yeah. Just wanted to do that quick clarification. But now we can get into some of the news. And the first thing we have is a Humble Bundle book bundle, which is actually, I think you were saying, the first one that is actually really good for security.
No, definitely not.
You didn't say that?
No, not the first one that's really good for security. This is a decent, not great. What I was saying was the last one. So usually we see a cybersecurity bundle come out towards the end of the year, November-ish, maybe in December. And we did see one come out during this last season, but it was that Pact book set that, frankly, I mean, Pact isn't a terribly respected
I remember
publisher.
That was when we were talking about.
So this is finally, a cybersecurity bundle out from a more respected publisher. It's out from Wiley, so they make the handbook series books, so like Shellcoder's Handbook. You can see as one of the books available here. Also, the web application hacker's handbook. The whole bundle. There are some good books in it. There are some, that I'm less inclined to care about. It's, in my opinion, so out of chat, or Mano Sherry, I'm sorry I butchered that, but mentions the Shellcoder Handbook was decent if my memory is correct. Shellcoder's Handbook is a book that's for quite a while been one of my recommendations. Kind of there with Art of Exploitation and Shellcoder's Handbook. Art of Exploitation being the better introduction, just covers it a bit more of a gentle introduction. And Shellcoder's Handbook kind of being the follow-up to that, has some overlap but goes well beyond it also. Realistically, these days, I'm a little bit less inclined to recommend Shellcoder's Handbook. It's still, the book isn't wrong, but at the same time, it has a whole section dedicated to Solaris, which
is becoming too dated.
As far as I'm aware, it's not even relevant. Solaris isn't even built anymore. So there's things like that. I've kind of seen it now as being more of I'll look back on it because I've got a hard copy that I still go back to, just as kind of like an inspirational thing. Just kind of go back, I'm stuck on something, what has been done in the past over this, and just look at that. Because I mean, it's a good book for what it covers. I'm just not quite sure if it's relevant as a recommendation anymore.
Okay.
But that said, I do just want to jump back on the topic of whether it's good or not. There are some great books in here, like kind of reversing secrets of reverse engineering. Gain age is definitely showing on that, but it's still like the fundamental concepts haven't changed. Reverse engineering, you still have many of the same fundamental concepts, so it's still a book I recommend. Or my favorite RE book is Practical Reverse Engineering, which is also part of this bundle.
The best one in there.
Malware Analyst Cookbook. It has a lot of like good kind of practical tips. It touches a bit more on the dynamic side of things. Obviously, it has the focus on malware too, which has some relation to reverse engineering. So like those three books are good. I've already mentioned Web Application Hacker's Handbook. The Art of Memory Forensics, it's a book I've only really reviewed, but I generally see it being highly recommended. So I'm going to assume it's pretty good. That said, on the bad side though, and I mean, I hesitate to really say bad, but the most expensive tier has Applied Cryptography, which is from 1994. It used to be a highly recommended book. Oh yeah, and there's this blockchain book, Investigating Cryptocurrencies, in that top tier also. I mean, I kind of wish, maybe Web App and Art of Memory Forensics were on one of the lower tiers. Then I'd even say maybe it's not worth the $20, but those two books kind of make it worth the $20 if you're not there. And Advanced Penetration Testing, I thought I had read this quite a few years ago. Turns out it was a different book that I had read and not the one from Wiley. And my quick glance, actually, Advanced Penetration Testing looks like it's all right. That said, that's just a very quick glance at it. So, I mean, the bundle is good. It's not amazing. The crypto stuff, like I mentioned, I don't get why Applied Cryptography, like I said, book from 1994 from Bruce Shiner is up there in like the highest tier. But Cryptography Engineering is usually the one that gets recommended these days versus Applied Cryptography. Covers some similar areas, but at least Cryptography Engineering kind of takes a bit more of a holistic view rather than a kind of crypto you can just sprinkle into your code base, which is more where Applied Cryptography comes in. And then there are some other books from Bruce Shiner. Tribe of Hackers was another thing. I'm not terribly familiar with them or with these books, but there's two. Tribe of Hackers, Cybersecurity Advice, and there's a Red Team one. Tribe of Hackers, Red Team. And essentially all the books looks like more or less people that are Twitter famous. Might be other people too, but I know they all had their Twitter handles included. And they just ask a bunch of questions, security related, like, how did people get into red teaming or into security, career questions, general advice, things of that nature. And it's just stuff. Yeah, and it's just like you've got a couple pages for one person, a couple pages for the next person, so on and so forth. So it actually, it looks interesting. I haven't read them, but it looks like an interesting format that, being a little bit more casual, you might get a little bit more of a candid answer to some things.
Yeah, for lack of a better word, it kind of gets you more of the meta information about the industry as opposed to the more deeply technical stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit higher level. And one thing to note, social engineering, this is the science of human hacking, not the art of human hacking. It's a more recent update. I want to say it was in 2018, but I don't have the date that it was released actually up. But it is an update from the classic social engineering book recommendation. So on a whole, Wiley's a good publisher. I like them. I mean, I've mentioned before, I really like No Surge Press, but Wiley's, I have no problem with Wiley. Generally speaking, their content is great. So this is a bundle. Money goes towards the EFF and Let's Encrypt. So, it's kind of a win-win.
I will say this probably is the best bundle I have seen for security stuff, at least personally. Like, there's like 3 of the books in this bundle I actually have hard copies of, and I think you do too. Like, yeah, I do want to say that this is probably like the best one I've seen. So at least
I think
up to
Wiley's
the like $10
like
tier or whatever, I think it would be worth it.
I mean, I'd say the 20 tiers worth it just for web app hackers, but I want to say I prefer Wiley's last bundle.
Okay,
because this isn't
fair
their
enough.
first bundle.
Do you remember any of what was in their last bundle? Was there some overlap or?
There's definitely some overlap.
Okay,
Because
I can't remember exactly what was in their
Shell
last
Coder's
one.
Handbook and Web App Hackers definitely would have been in there.
Okay. I don't remember seeing like reversing like secrets of RE and
practical reverse engineering has definitely been in another bundle.
Okay. But yeah, overall, I think it is a good bundle. Just to sum that up. Do you have any other thoughts on it?
No, I just want to kind of cover some of those books. I mean, it's if you don't have some of these books, I like checking out these bundles, even if I'm not the biggest fan of them. I mean, because you're able to put your money towards towards donating towards charity and stuff. I mean, it's a good way to get some of these PDFs, even if you could get them by other less legitimate means.
Yeah, it's a win-win with the charity aspect of it for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, the price definitely isn't bad.
Yeah. So getting into Google Summer of Code, I focused specifically when we originally had this topic. We talked more about we focused more on the Radare 2 aspect of it. So most of what I have to talk about it is on that. But Google runs Summer of Code every year.
If I'll jump in there and just mention it. If you're not familiar with Summer of Code, it's kind of like a paid mentorship program. Every year, it's not paid well. Your pay is depending on what country you're actually a resident of. It's between like $3,000 and $6,600 for 3 months of effort from May 18th to August 17th. And since I know a lot of our listeners are out of US or Canada, it's $6,000 for Americans or Canadians. Okay. So basically, organizations will apply to this. They'll have several projects they kind of want to get done or ideas of things that people can work on. And then students from accredited universities who haven't previously done more than one Google Summer of Code can then apply writing kind of a proposal for what they're going to work on, including like all their milestones and timeline for completing whatever project they come up with. Some organizations will let you just suggest anything. Generally speaking, they're intended to come from the organization's project list. So kind of what's important here, though, is there are several kind of security-related companies that do participate in this. As mentioned, Radare. I think we disagree on the pronunciation there.
Yeah, we do. I think we had this discussion.
They've got a call for students. Wireshark, AFLplusplus, Metasploit.
OWASP.
Yeah, we could just say R2. That was out of chat.
I like saying Radare. It sounds fancy, so it's fun to say,
Yeah, so there are some good companies. I mean, this is a way that it's a bit of a resume padding. Maybe you're not going to get into a cybersecurity-based internship. Working on one of these projects kind of shows your interest in the security world. Looks good because you're giving back to open source.
Yeah, that's what I think the big benefit of Summer of Code is. It's less about the pay and more about getting some work experience, some resume stuff on there. If you don't have previous work experience, I think it's really good for that. But yeah, speaking specifically on R2, we've talked a bit about R2 before and how much it sucks. Just kidding, not really. But yeah, it's already been in Summer of Code since 2015, and they talk about some of the features that came out of it from that. I think they talk about timeless debugging came from that, remote GDB and LLDB support, improved type inferencing. So yeah, so they have some other projects on here, like you were saying earlier, that they would like people to try to work on. So some of the things they highlight is like type analysis improvements, plugins, more plugins, and Python API support and stuff like that. They do require applicants to do a micro task apparently, and submit it in a pull request. So they have like a list of some of the tasks you can do. And they say like it should be something that takes you like roughly like 2 to 3 weeks to do. Not something that's not too long, but shows that you have at least an interest and a base level understanding of the code base. So yeah, they expect you to submit the micro task, and then you submit the proposal for what you want to work on. And then they review it, and you can get accepted, and you work on it for a couple months.
Yeah, well, you work on it, to be clear, you work on it with a mentor. Well, I mean, the mentor's not necessarily going to be working on your project, but you do have somebody to help you out with kind of knowing the code base, somebody who knows the process and all of that. That's kind of a big part of the Google Summer of Code, is you do end up with a mentor who is already an active contributor to whatever project you're on.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I do want to say, I think there were a few project ideas, like task ideas that were left out that I think should be added. Well,
so and people are able to suggest their own projects.
They are,
too.
Yeah.
These are just
that's kind of why I want to throw them out there, is because they're not on that list. So like if anybody's listening who is planning like on maybe doing a proposal or something like that, I think Cutter is also included in like what they kind of want worked on, and Cutter's the front end for R2. There's a few things that have always kind of hindered R2 in being actually used for me. One of those is large binaries just absolutely destroy R2, or at least Cutter. Trying to load like anything non-CTS size, it's going to crash, almost guaranteed. And the other big issue that I've seen mentioned is project saving. There's a lot of bugs with, and like if you save a project and reopen it, you can end up with like a lot of errors and stuff like that. I think some of those issues they should have highlighted a bit better, because those are what's preventing people from using it, really. The type analysis, that'd be cool if it could be improved, for example, but I think some of those other bugs that make it not a viable option should be more prioritized. And it'd be cool if, people could try to work on that for their Summer of Code project.
Yeah, but at the same time, this is something that they need to be able to complete during that Summer of Code as somebody who isn't intimately familiar with the code base.
That's true.
Are we... 3 months seems like a fairly short time to actually pull out some significant optimizations, which would probably require rewriting fair chunks of R2.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. It's just something that, like, I think is worth looking into. If you want to be like a hero, not all heroes wear capes. You could do look into something like that and see if it would be viable.
I do find it interesting. They mentioned the SLAY disassembler backend, kind of giving it some interoperability with Ghidra.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I noticed that's one of their tasks. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, that would be cool. I do have a bit of a question from this, not really related to Summer of Code, but more like R2 specifically. Do you think with enough time and like effort put in from things like GSOC and other things that R2 will be viable compared to existing disassemblers within like, I don't know, a year or two? Do you think it'll ever like reach that level? No.
So it's not that I don't think it'll ever reach that level. It's been around for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of it is just R2's kind of growing from like just that originally just the hex editor. And I think that has added kind of a lot of
baggage,
like just because of that slow incrementation to it, I feel like there's a good chance that ultimately it's always kind of going to be held back by its history. Now, with that, I could be wrong about that. I have a fairly negative performance in terms of predicting things like that. So, I mean,
Were
definitely
you one
should
of the
be
ones that said a Zune was going to win over the iPod?
No, but I didn't think YouTube would catch on.
Oh, okay.
So that's one thing.
On that one.
I mean, I kind of blame my internet experience at that point. I mean, that was still high school time for me, and internet was kind of lacking in the middle of Saskatchewan here.
Yeah, fair enough.
But nonetheless, I mean, when it comes down to it, because R2 does have users, there are going to be people using it. When it comes to actually moving over to it, I feel like part of it is also just going to be there's the baggage, there's the reputation that already exists. That's why I don't think 1 to 2 years is going to be enough time to change opinions. Like, it's going to need to take something pretty significant to kind of see people giving R2 another shot, especially once they've already established themselves. That's kind of why I see Ghidra maybe being a replacement in terms of the open source aspect, because people are giving it a shot and they are learning to use that kind of as their first tool.
That's important.
I mean, because of the lack of baggage or history with Ghidra, I feel like it would have to win out over R2.
I will say it's kind of a shame, just because, like, if any of you who have, like, opened up Cutter and given it a try, like, it is a fairly common opinion that it is the best looking disassembler. Like, the UI is actually beautiful, but, like, under the hood, it just, it kind of sucks. It's like a Ferrari with no engine. That's my favorite,
I think
comparison.
that's apt. Though I will say, I have used R2 for some CTFs. I just, couldn't put down this one challenge, so it has a web UI, which I exposed over the internet and was solving a CTF challenge while waiting in line at a supermarket.
Yeah, just want to address a question from chat. Did Cutter get better recently? Last time I saw it, it was terrible. They have been working on it, but mainly what I was saying there was, like, the UI and, like, its usability, like, finding stuff in it was really nice. But yeah, under the hood, like, anything non-CTF size, like I was saying, it would just crash it for me. It's been a while since I've tried it. I will stipulate it with that. Maybe they've been working on that and it's actually gotten better, but it's still, it needs a lot of work to be a competitor, I think. And like Z was saying, I don't know if it will become one since something like Ghidra came out. So.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I would like to see it become one. I'm just saying I don't think it would. And yeah, also with what Spectre's saying, like, it's in terms of Cutter having just at least a fairly nice looking UI, not that it's necessarily the best layout or anything, but that, it looks nice.
Yeah, it'd be nice to build on top of that, but what can you do? So, getting into some security issues, we do have a WordPress plugin issue. Big surprise. WordPress plugins are very secure, so this came as a big surprise. That was obviously sarcasm, but there was a critical issue found in the ThemeGrill demo importer, which can lead to database wipe and escalation to admin.
But escalation to admin after you wipe the database.
Yeah,
that is kind of an important aspect. Because, I mean, essentially all this says is you're able to call the reset. I forget what it's actually called, but it's essentially just a reset function. Drops all the tables.
Wizard actions is the
name of the hook. It ends up dropping all the tables in the database, reinstalls WordPress, and whatever user you are right then becomes admin in the new. Or uses that user's password to make you admin on this new install of WordPress. Fairly straightforward issue. It's this is a kind of a simplified version of the code that I've brought up. Basically, it just doesn't look if you're actually an admin or anything beforehand. Now, my guess. You can theorize that, maybe this is a backdoor, but that seems extremely loud and not terribly useful as a backdoor. Drop everything. Now you have admin over nothing. So yeah. I'm not going to say it's a backdoor, but it could just be as simple as forgetting to put the auth check there. More likely, I think it's just they didn't realize that this could be called without or be included without actually already being on admin page. Because it happens to be one of the admin Ajax pages that you can hit without actually being logged in yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like you said, it was a simple issue and it was a really simple fix too. I think the fix was literally like 3 lines.
Yeah,
They just
literally
added
just
like a check to see if the user permissions were about accessible for that action.
yeah, it's if current user can manage options, and if they can't, die with the error. Yeah, it's 4 lines, I guess, if you include the empty white space.
Yeah, it's funny. It's
Or
a
the
simple
empty
issue
line.
to fix, but it seems with the timeline, it did actually take quite a while to actually fix.
No, it
So,
took a few days, or a couple days.
well, I'm just seeing like reported the issue. 6. Oh, you know why? It's day, month, year. I was like,
Yeah.
okay. I thought originally it
Well,
was month, day, year.
you thought they reported in the 14th month of the year. Gotcha.
I only saw the 6, 6, and 11 at first. Okay.
Yeah, so it looks like basically they reached out on the 6th of February, didn't get a response. Made a second attempt on the 11th, got a response via email on the 14th, and it was fixed by the 16th.
Yeah, so it was actually a lot quicker than I originally thought. With it being like, I thought it was like 5 months.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I'm not really going to complain about that. And this just kind of comes down, if this was something that was forgotten, kind of as to why there's kind of a push to centralize things like authentication and authorization checks, rather than needing to remember every place in your code that needs to do some auth check, having something at a higher level that performs that, something that's not going to forget to perform that. Just centralizing that. I think that's a big reason why we're seeing less cross-site scripting, for example, these days. Obviously, it's still out there, but with Angular, React, all of that, they perform some of that sanitization for you in a centralized manner. Right when they're about to do the output, they're able to do that sanitization. So as a developer
as well.
Yeah, well, so as a developer, though, you don't need to worry about doing it everywhere it's needed. Something kind of more centralized does that, and that's where I think authorization, authentication needs to do the same thing. Have that be centrally checked rather than doing it on individual functions and pages.
So you think maybe at a later date it will kind of die out, kind of like XSS has?
It's harder. Authorization, so authentication's reasonably easy to do centrally. Authorization isn't as easy. It's one thing I do like Python for the decorators, because you can kind of just decorate it with what your function requires, and then you can very easily see if a function has a decorator or not. But in terms of how you kind of organize that is really application specific, and because of that, I don't know if we're necessarily going to see it disappear too quickly. I think because I mean, this is also like issues like IDOR kind of come down to just missing this check. So yeah, I don't think we're necessarily going to see it disappear too quickly here until we see some sort of really, really clean pattern to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that was my thought as well. Is it is harder to like.
It is harder. I'm just saying, it is
in that sense.
This is a good example of why it's worth considering trying to centralize those security things.
Yeah, because we've been seeing a lot of these lately, like a lot of low hanging fruit.
You generally see a lot of these things.
Yeah, and Cisco is no exception. Keeping it rolling with the low hanging fruit. Low hanging fruit and Cisco, name a better combination, by the way.
Well, so we've talked about Cisco. Actually, if we include this episode on half of the last 10 episodes, they've also come up on episode 22, 23, 26, and 28. So
we talk about Cisco a lot.
They have a lot of these issues that are good examples of what not to do.
They're all high level, very low hanging fruit, easy to understand, straightforward issues too. Yeah, and this one is no exception. It's just default credentials in their smart software manager.
Yeah, specifically within the high availability service, which is not enabled by default. Yeah, and this is something that's kind of run on premises where somebody isn't able to connect to the internet all the time. So this is kind of like your license managing server. You're running that inside of your organization to kind of manage licenses and all of that without actually needing to hit Cisco servers every time you want to do that. So that also limits where this is going to be hit from. Technically, remote attacker, if they can get access to that service, can do it, but this also sounds like it's mostly being used within like internal networks that they don't want to give it internet access to. So that limits it, but it's still a very simple issue. Default credentials, static password that's not under the control of the sysadmin. And the update just puts it under control of the sysadmin.
Now, I do think it is also worth mentioning that while this does allow read and write access to data, it does not allow, they say it doesn't allow full administrative rights to control the device. But one thing I noticed that was kind of weird is I'm pretty sure the CVE they assigned to this got like a 9.8 or something, which was a bit surprising considering, like you were saying, it requires that high availability feature, which is not enabled by default. And
well, so
you don't get
availability
the admin,
by
like,
default doesn't necessarily. Yeah, it does have a base of 9.8. I didn't notice that. I mean,
Yeah,
I guess I
it
noticed
seems a
it was
bit high.
critical. Let's see here. I'm just looking at what this. I just brought up on stream what kind of the score information was.
Yeah.
Yeah, CIA is all high, so I guess. Well, I mean, having read-write access is going to be pretty significant because that's access to everything that the application protects or does. All of the code, all of the binaries.
Yeah, I guess I'm just like the access complexity, for example. I mean,
Well,
I guess it's not complex.
Default
but
credentials, it's going to be low.
you're right, but that like not being enabled by default should be considered a bit more, I think.
No, so that comes down out of kind of the issue, and that's coming more into your environment and other issues like that. That's not applied to your base CVSS score.
Fair enough. It's just something that I was kind of curious about. But yeah, not much more to say here. Honestly, it's default credentials. It's not super interesting, but it's we have to.
It's Cisco, so we have to keep talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing we've talked about a few times before is NordVPN, and they have a HackerOne bounty that was made public, and it was about their Linux desktop executable not using Pi. So this was
yeah, it says no ASLR, but I don't believe that's true since ASLR is your system level thing.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of is the issue here. This person just saw. I'm going to assume they saw the Slack report because they linked to a Slack report about the same issue elsewhere. They saw that report and just kind of assumed, well, okay, well, the desktop executable for NordVPN doesn't do this, therefore let's report it. And in fact, when NordVPN went ahead and just rejected this as just informative,
rightfully so,
he linked that and, asked them to reconsider the risk, and they basically said not having Pi is not a vulnerability.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you just mentioned you agree with that. I also agree that in this case, it's not an issue. I did want to talk a little bit, at least, about why it's not an issue. First of all, Pi is essentially randomizing the application-specific code. So ASLR on the system will randomize where all the libraries that it uses, like the shared libraries that it uses, where all those are loaded into memory will be randomized. That's kind of a system-wide thing as long as the library supports it. Generally speaking, I think everything does these days.
Most are position-independent code, yeah.
Yeah, so most libraries are going to be loaded in randomly. That said, there's always this little bit of application code, your specific binary, that by default won't be compiled in a way that it can just be loaded anywhere. It needs to be loaded in a specific location. And that does give people access to certain ROP gadgets, certain code reuse in general, because you do know where that's going to be loaded if it's not compiled as Pi.
Yeah, it's pretty important for ASLR, like full ASLR.
It is. So then I guess the thing comes down to is, why doesn't this NordVPN Linux desktop executable matter? Why doesn't that need full ASLR? And to that, it kind of comes down to the attack scenario. As we mentioned, there was a Slack report. I'll pull that up here too, which they did accept. There we go. Slack, it was a small bounty, $100, low rating. they basically copied their report from this one, it looks like, for the most part, cleaned up some of the text, but they accepted this one. And I think what's important is to note the difference in terms of the attack scenarios. With NordVPN, this is just their Linux desktop executable. This isn't the service. This isn't anything running privilege. This is running as your current user. As your current user, you can already read the memory of applications that you run.
It doesn't give you a privilege escalation, really.
Yeah, well, so it doesn't give you privilege well. So that's kind of where the difference between Nord, where this executable comes in, and Slack. With Slack, you have a remote aspect coming into it. A remote attacker might be able to find some sort of memory corruption vulnerability in Slack. The desktop application doesn't have any sort of remote attacker to it. The networking services and stuff do, but this is just the thing that kind of calls OpenVPN. So that's where there's no interaction remotely, and a user can already read their own memory.
Yeah.
So having ASLR in general just doesn't matter all that much, or really at all here. It can be trivially determined. Just load in your own library that reads the memory, LD preload or whatever. Obviously, they can take steps to try and prevent that, and that's where you kind of get into all the anti-cheat stuff, which focuses more on doing something like that.
Yeah.
But I did want to point out, because having Pi sounds like it would be a good thing. It's just there are cases where it doesn't actually have an impact.
That being said, I do think it is reasonable. There is no reason, really, for any executables to not be compiled as position independent nowadays. Pretty much every ELF loader on Earth supports it. There's just no reason not to have it. That being said, I don't know. I don't think the blame should be placed as much on application developers. I think the blame should be placed on compilers for not having it by default by now. I think compilers like GCC and Clang and all that, all those compilers, they should all have position independent executable as a default flag. I don't think there's any reason to have it as not default anymore.
I'm sure somebody will correct us on that.
Maybe, but I can't think of any system.
I mean, I'd have to imagine a big part of it is performance.
You think so? No, I don't think so. Just relocating the image to a different address isn't going to have
needing to do indirect jumps instead of actually specifying the addresses.
I mean, you're right. There is a bit more of an overhead, trying to do the dynamic
and that really adds up, though.
But
I think over a larger application.
That being said, though, those larger applications are typically going to be the exception, and that's where you'd use a flag to disable it rather than having to enable it. You know what I mean? I think that's where it makes it kind of a good argument to still have it enabled. Just make it so you can disable it if you want to. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of my position on it. I think by now it should be enabled by default.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd want to... Yeah, before I come down hard on that, I would want to research a bit more onto the opposing side. Why exactly isn't it? Because I'm sure we can't be the first people to think, it should be enabled by default. I'm sure there's good arguments on the other side that I'm just unaware of.
Yeah, I will take a comment from chat as well. Balika. ThemeGrill has a few bugs that makes it crash if you put a switch in a VM and enable ASLR. Okay. I don't know much about ThemeGrill, so, fair point. Visual Studio enables it by default. Yeah, I think I knew that. I'm not surprised. Visual Studio actually does have some pretty secure defaults, when it comes to compiling and stuff like that.
For all the hate Windows gets, Windows has played around with some different security ideas.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially, I mean, now they've dropped it, but EMED and stuff, they've at least done some security research and they've made some good progress. For all the hate Windows gets, I did want to point that out.
I want to say, at least in terms of userland, Windows is I'm
definitely talking userland.
Yeah, but Windows is probably better in terms of security compared to Linux.
It's also more targeted that. Yeah, that's the obvious push for having more security. That said, jumping right back into the Nord stuff, I mean, I'm going to say, could adding Pi adds a minimal benefit. so you could probably argue maybe for best practice. It's definitely not an issue that I think's worth paying out for, especially when there is no actual attack scenario, that it is purely just adding a layer of obscurity onto your attack, or just that little extra layer.
This
Like,
definitely
it won't
does
defeat
seem
any
like
attacks.
I was kind of trying to make a quick buck off of very, like, you know, let's throw this at the wall and see if it sticks and see if I can get paid for it, you know? So,
Yeah, actually,
you know,
since you mentioned that, I'm curious if he's reported. No, it only shows the NordVPN one. I was going to see if he had reported on other stuff. It
does seem like he was just trying to make a quick buck there. So, you know, I think it's absolutely reasonable to turn that down. I'm actually a little bit surprised that he requested to disclose the report. I'm not really sure why. Like, they probably had a laugh at that and figured, okay, why not? We'll agree to disclose it.
So on that note, actually, NordVPN's really good about disclosing. So if we move on to our next issue, which is a race condition in one of the NordVPN services this time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this time, though, you'll notice that it was NordVPN that actually requested the disclosure first. And that's true on other reports too. Like, generally speaking, NordVPN's actually been really good about trying to disclose the issues that they've actually paid out on, at least.
Yeah, that's a pretty neat observation. I actually didn't notice that.
Yeah, so I mean, we've covered some NordVPN things. There have actually been quite a few issues submitted that we just haven't talked about on here. That NordVPN's just basically been on top of resolving. In this case, it looks like it was already on the way to be patched, or at least it was addressed there. Looks like it took a little while, but I don't know, generally speaking, it looks like they've been on top of their issues when I look at their activity.
So wait, I'm a bit curious. When I was looking on that page, they said that it was already being addressed, but they still paid him out for it?
Well, it was still a vulnerability in the current version. I mean, that's kind of up to the companies how they want to pay it out. Like, if it's something they've already fixed, but if they didn't know they had fixed it, in this case they had just changed from using a name to using an IP, I believe it was, and that effectively fixed it by limiting the characters that could be used. That said, we're talking kind of all this meta stuff, talking about the actual issue here. NordVPN kind of has the application we were just talking about, that desktop application. In this case, this is on Windows, but you have, it ends up just calling out to OpenVPN to actually run a particular configuration when you want to use the VPN. It doesn't actually implement its own VPN protocol or anything. So essentially all that happens is NordVPN will validate that the OpenVPN config is located at whatever path it constructs when it's passed in the server domain parameter. If it's valid, OpenVPN launches it with that path. But using NTFS opportunistic locks, you can detect when NordVPN first makes that read to check the validity of that configuration file, and then change it immediately after it's made its read. So the second attempt to read it by OpenVPN will be a different config. The new config, you specify your own engine, basically allowing you to inject a DLL at system level, like system privileges.
Yeah, classic time of check, time of use issue.
So like, the actual attack, like the NTFS stuff, like that's, we've talked about some of the work James Forshaw has done when it comes to kind of the user LAN fake sim linking. This is like, it's released, this is called the bait and switch. The tool to do that's released right alongside, I believe, the sim linking stuff. This is just more work from James Forshaw.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a common issue. For whatever reason, it's so common for software devs to forget how much of a degree of control users can have over the file system while an application is running at the same time. So they don't even like consider that, you know, doing two different reads of the same file and checking it and using it at those two different times can result in different it being basically bait and switch, like you were saying. I don't know why. It seems it's just one of those things, I guess, that skipped a lot of people's minds, and we're trying to, play catch up, I guess,
think
now.
about every time because you're writing your code, you're thinking about, okay, does this and this and this and this, kind of just stepping through the process. You're not necessarily thinking about what other applications are going to be doing at that same time or how that can negatively impact. Like, I mean, this is just coming down to, multi-processing, multi-threading is hard.
Yeah, it's one of those things where when you look at the code, it works. It's not a bug that you're going to catch because it's not really noisy, but it is like a bug that can be abused by someone maliciously, obviously.
Yeah,
so
someone who takes the time to understand the system they're targeting.
Yeah, so it just kind of slips under the radar, I guess. But yeah, he got paid $500 for that, so that's cool. I do want to say, like, NordVPN, man, we've covered a few issues from them, but like you were saying, like, disclosing the reports, paying out the bounties, like, they've been doing pretty good in terms of security, I think. Which,
yeah, and I mean, they have
obviously,
to. I mean, they have to regain the trust after
that's
losing
what I
the
was
key.
gonna say. Is like, yeah, with the key issue we were talking about before, their trust was kind of shaken in the security community. But I am starting to like them more and more. Like, looking through some of these reports and seeing how cooperative they are with researchers and their bounty program.
Yeah, and I've just pulled up their activity, like, of a lot of the issues that they've had. And I mean, they've had a lot of issues reported in the months since.
And they're paying out quite a bit, too. Like, there's a few, like, thousands, 500s. Like, now that's funny that a lot of the older ones are, like, not disclosed, but all the newer ones...
Well, this isn't necessarily in order of...
No, I know, but I saw, like, a lot of them that were not disclosed were from, like, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, etc.
Yeah, and I have a feeling those could also be, like, more informational things. Obviously, we have no idea what they are. They're not disclosed.
Yeah, I can't really speculate.
Although I guess some of these do say bounty awarded, so...
Yeah.
Yeah, there is the issue, or there was an issue.
Yeah, but yeah, just wanted to say, like, I think, my trust in them is kind of going up the more as time goes on, so...
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of had more focus on how a company responds to an issue rather than just the fact there was an issue.
Yeah.
Just fair. Because given enough time, people are going to mess up. And quite likely mess up in a very big way. And I would rather see how they respond to when they make those mistakes rather than just focus on the mistakes they've made. Because if they respond well, and I said this back when we had the first issue with NordVPN and that key, I felt like they responded fairly well. They immediately went like, here's what we're going to do to approach this in the future. Here's how we're going to be proactive about these by, opening up the bug bounty program, by starting an audit to make, or by starting an audit to make sure, that same issue isn't going to happen, and just a general audit in general of like their general infrastructure. And things of that nature. Like, it was what I feel like was an appropriate response. Or maybe I'm just saying that because I also went and bought like a 3-year subscription to NordVPN before this, so...
NordVPN fanboy confirmed. just kidding.
Yeah, so I it's just my biases coming out.
Yeah. From chat, K9, Team K9, Steam bounty is rough. Yeah, it is. Steam, they don't want nothing disclosed. It's very rare for HackerOne bounties on from Steam to be disclosed. And I've talked to some friends who have submitted to Steam, and they do require like quite a bit of. They put a lot of the burden of proof on the researcher to prove that it is actually an issue. Like, you have to demonstrate exploitability before they'll consider it. Yeah, I've heard the Steam bounty is quite rough. So, yeah, I just did want to address that. Another HackerOne bounty we have, though, is for the Periscope Android app, which is developed by Twitter. It's basically, it seems to be like a streaming platform for like streaming in real life events and stuff like that. I've never used it, but yeah, they have an issue where deep links can lead to CSRF in the follow action. So
yeah, and I like this. Just CSRF is one of those issues I felt has been so underrated over the years. And to be fair, now with it, possibly, going to be disappearing with same site cookies, but we'll see how that actually plays out with how sites will configure same site. But on the web, it's possibly on its way out, but it's one of those issues that has kind of been overlooked. And this one's kind of interesting because you get that CSRF by deep linking to, in the example they give, by deep linking directly to the follow action. So you send somebody this link that just goes right into the application, starts it up, follows the person, and away you go. And generally speaking, like on the web, it's done with a GET request. So in this case, it's a link. I think they'd have to actually try and follow. Although I guess, sorry, on my phone, I never actually let applications automatically handle anything. I always have the extra tapping, but I suppose a lot of people probably do just let it open right up.
Yeah, I add the extra tapping too. Security power.
Well, I just want to be able to change what something opens in every so often.
Yeah, I keep that, and I always use the just once instead of the always option. Yeah, but yeah, this is kind of fun because like you were saying, like with it being an overlooked issue, this is kind of what happened here because they note that like in the actual web version there is CSRF protection, but when it comes to those Android deep links, they don't consider it. So it's kind of like an example of what you were talking about there.
And this isn't it's not uncommon. Not necessarily like getting an action like this, but being able to invoke pages that you maybe shouldn't have access to is another kind of common thing, just calling the intents that they expose directly. And that's kind of what this is doing also. A little bit different, but similar in concept.
Now, I will say, did you see how much this guy got paid for this bounty? I was like really surprised.
Well, I see it now at 1540.
Yeah, that's a lot. 1500 for like what's a relatively straightforward issue. Like that's pretty good, man.
I mean, think about kind of the damage a little bit more though. If it's like Twitter, I mean, follower count matters, and if you're able to effectively make people follow you, like it makes sense to
follow bots.
Give it a fair. Yeah, although what's Twitter's kind of payout in general? If they mention it. So this is actually on the lower end. So it looks like they just have a pretty decent payout in general because that's other valid vulnerabilities. They're paying out like, code execution up to $20,000 on core of Twitter.
Damn, people listening, look into Twitter, man. Their payouts are kind of crazy. When I saw that 1540, I thought maybe it was a mistake at first.
No, like, I mean, compared to most HackerOne things,
it's high.
Twitter's definitely paying out a lot higher. That said, a lot of the big companies that run their own bounties are paying out pretty well.
Yeah.
But it's just HackerOne and like all of the all of these open bounty programs, like the pay generally isn't that good.
Yeah, so Twitter looks pretty good for bounties if you want to do that. But yeah, another straightforward issue. But still worth mentioning.
Touching on chat, I've been really happy with Google this month. Their bounties have been quite good. Yeah, Google's always kind of been ahead of the game when it comes to paying out on their bounties and paying out quite well for bounties. They have the money to spare to kind of throw out towards people reporting issues.
I was going to say, though, doesn't Google have kind of a blitz going on right now where they're paying out a bit more than they usually do as well? I don't want to say
I'm
that
not
for
sure about.
But like, I think that has been something I've heard. Yes, okay. I've heard it, but I didn't want to state it for sure because I could have been wrong. So yeah, just something I thought about.
Sounds like something we should have covered and didn't.
Yeah. Oh well. We'll take the whippings for it later. So we have SlickWraps as well. Now this is archived, and this is going to kind of contribute to the drama we'll talk about later. But this was from a guy, Links Hex00. I hacked SlickWraps. Here's how. So he starts off the article kind of cheeky, showing off precise order numbers and revenue counts and refunds to prove that he had access to sensitive information. And there was kind of a question in the community around legitimacy of the company. And this is what actually sparked his curiosity, was looking into how legit the company actually is. And he ended up finding a phone case customization portal on their site. And through, I'm guessing it was like images. It actually had a path traversal leading to arbitrary upload to webroot, which you can guess why that's an issue. You can just upload shell scripts and run them to get a shell.
Yeah, well,
which
in
is
this
actually
case,
exactly what he did.
Yeah, he did a PHP, and it was basically you could target any file name, including path traversal, but just overwriting any file. So he ended up putting it just randomly in the media folder. But his technique was to go uploaded a .htaccess file to enable indexing. And I've kind of got a short version of everything that happened. As we're just mentioning, there's the insecure kind of file upload. This is in PHP. It's a Magento website, I believe, is what was mentioned. So he's able to overwrite or upload his own HTX to enable indexing, which lets him see this media folder that has content like resume, backups, and all the customer uploads. Since that folder also executed PHP, which is not a configuration you should have, but since he's able to get out of the folder anyhow, doesn't really matter since you just moved to a folder that could execute. But he uploaded a web shell. From there, decrypted the application's configuration to get the MySQL and Redis credentials. At which point he investigated the complete 17 gigabyte MySQL dump, which gave him access to customer data, addresses, phone numbers, admin accounts and hashes, logs, and API credentials. I kind of like that. Just, he actually, I'll pull up. There's another file here. He has a little penetration test report that goes along with this that kind of steps through everything that he did.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's investigating the complete 17 gigabyte MySQL dump gave me access. Like, he's the one who just dumped the entire thing. There are some concerns over... I don't want to say some concerns over the legality, because this is clearly illegal.
Yeah.
But there are some concerns over his process in general. So anyway, gets access to all that information. So he injects an admin user, gives him the admin dashboard access. While doing that, he found a backup of WordPress that also had its own backdoor in it, this hello.php file. From those API creds he found, found creds for Zendesk. Use that to create a Zendesk, which is kind of like a support system. So he created a new admin Zendesk account, which gave him access to all the historic and current support conversations going on. And Zendesk also has this email service, so like you can read some emails from the Zendesk application, like stuff going to the support. So he was able to access get the password reset for the SlickWraps help Twitter account. He was able to get access to Slack using that email. We've kind of talked about using exposed emails to sign up for services. So Slack's one of those examples. We've talked about that before. And as we already showed, kind of getting some of the payment information, balances, transactions, again, from the payment gateway APIs. And, to kind of end it off, he goes into his disclosure.
Now, I do want to say there is one more thing.
Sure.
I think in that media directory that he actually, got the indexing on, I think they actually had resumes of all the past and
I did mention that they had resumes, backups, and customer uploads.
That. Okay, so yeah, like that's another thing that's quite like privacy invasive for sure. Sorry, you can go on there.
Yeah, well, I was just going to go on. He talks about his disclosure a little bit. Fortunately, reading from the page, fortunately for SlickWraps, I had no nefarious intent. As I've done countless times, I put things back where they belonged, left quietly, and prepared to disclose a severe vulnerability report. There we go. There's also kind of the question of whether they deserved the leniency I'm about to describe. So here's what and like I said, there are... Some people think he responsibly disclosed this. I definitely do not. I don't know what your thoughts are, but his disclosure essentially looked like this. On early morning, February 16th, like 1:04 a.m., hey, SlickWraps, you failed the vibe check. That's his attempt at reaching out. He followed up with an email. He doesn't include the content of the email, though. He just includes their automated response, showing that, hey, he did it. He censors the timestamp on, so don't know when he did it. He sent an email, doesn't include the content, which I think is really fishy, but fine. 40 minutes later, at 1:40 a.m., looks like your customers aren't happy. This isn't going to make it any better, ... That's... Oh yeah, and then he uploads a proof of concept .txt file, which just contains links. I have the exact quote here. Essentially, links at RLSec was here, not affiliated with Axe. It does... And then, goes and claims that this is totally a legitimate attempt to disclose this. This is absolutely a white hat move. Like,
absolutely not.
These are... So, and then he was blocked at 2:03. So basically everything happened within an hour. And there's more to kind of say about this. Sound like you were going to say something though, Spectre?
I was just going to say, like... I think the blocking him on the part of SlickWraps was also dumb. Obviously, the way he was disclosing it wasn't
I mean, the way this looks like is a ransom attempt. I mean, we don't see the email he sent. I wouldn't be surprised to find out he asked for a ransom. This looks more like a brag or a threat rather than an actual attempt to disclose anything. This is, you failed the vibe check. Looks like your customers aren't happy. This isn't going to make it any better. I mean, it doesn't look like he's trying to initiate any sort of conversation. It looks like he's just taunting them.
Yeah, so looking at the full contents of the email is really fishy, like you were saying. I mean, if there's any sensitive information in there, you can just block the actual, sensitive information, but keep the, rest of the contents of the email in there.
So the timestamps are another thing that I find weird that he blocks. Because he includes February, but he doesn't include anything else. And he blocks them elsewhere too. That said, so he did actually make further attempts contact. So it was a day later, or no, maybe it was a little bit longer than that. So a day later, everything was all leaked. Apparently by somebody else. Totally wasn't him. Somebody else emailed all their customers with similar talking points. But when he did eventually get to the support team, and this happened, like I said, it was a little bit later. He blocks out the date, so who knows when it was. Either way, his only message to the support... Well, his first of all, it was unblock me at SlickWraps and, use that to contact and see if the help. But his only message was this multi-paragraph long message to them that ended with, we won't be responding to any further messages. And it never mentioned anything about wanting to disclose the vulnerability. At no point does he mention wanting to disclose the vulnerability. All he mentions is you need to report this breach, because of GDPR.
Which is really weird. Like, why would you bring up GDPR?
It's a weird talking point to bring up. And he claims that he did not send the email, so all the customers got an email that SlickWraps was hacked, which has the exact same talking point of the GDPR aspect. I think the email was from Troy Hunt's Twitter. I don't think it's on here. Yeah, I don't think he actually makes mention of it. That's what I'm looking for and not seeing it. But still, his response was this huge thing, just, don't, you have to notify everybody if you attempt to shift blame. We'll clarify and correct deceptive information if you attempt to downplay. We will expose every piece of data we have, including sales records, transaction logs, all of that. So basically, like, this is a straight up threat.
Yeah.
This is him threatening them to be like, if you don't tell your clients or your customers that there's been this breach, we're going to leak everything. Like, when I first saw this, it was linked out as white hat, colon, I hacked SlickWraps, here's how. this is not a white hat move in any sense of the word. I mean, first of all, completely illegal too. Even testing that file upload would have been legal. That is, in most countries, that's going to be an illegal move. A lot of people kind of do that, and there's definitely push for companies, like, especially if you go and immediately report it. But it's a completely different story to actually go exploit that and then start going through their network, going through all the data,
multi-stage attack,
pulling down the entire database. Sure, Melgod, we're talking about SlickWraps was compromised. Melgod just asked for a quick recap. SlickWraps was compromised by this guy who claims to be a white hat hacker. Essentially completely popped their server, dumped the entire database, and when he goes to disclose that, he gives these vague things about failing the vibe check, and people aren't going to be happy. And threatens to release all of the information that he's dumped. Or Balika says, dark gray at best. I mean, this feels more like it was it was intentionally trying to get media attention over it, which I suppose maybe they've successfully done. Like, this just seems malicious. Like they were intentionally being malicious about this while trying to be a researcher.
Now, one thing I did want to mention is I mentioned earlier about it being archived, and the reason for that is this post was put up on Medium, and Medium took it down.
Yeah, now, Medium took it down, and his Twitter is either deleted or he deleted it.
Yeah. Now, there was a lot of discussion that I saw in the communities criticizing Medium for taking it down. I'm actually going to say that it's probably reasonable, considering, like you said, this is absolutely like illegal in what he did. So I think it's fair that Medium
yeah,
took
but
it
I
down.
mean, you're allowed to publish illegal actions. It's not.
I still, though, like I'm not like totally against Medium for taking it down. That being said, I think it is good that it's archived too. Like, I don't know how I kind of stand on that. Like, I don't.
That kind of comes down to a free speech issue, which I don't think we necessarily want to go into here. But
I think I don't think it's reasonable to expect Medium to keep it up, but I think it's still good to at least have it as a reference. But yeah, this is just like an everybody sucks here situation, really. Overall,
Yeah, like there are definitely some, like, SlickWraps has made some significant issues. Apparently they were using like code that actually had comments in saying, don't use this in production. And they went and used that.
Of course.
So, SlickWraps, I'm not trying to say they have no fault here, but the more interesting thing to me is this researcher's approach to this and the attempt to make it white hat. I was kind of mentioning the hidden timestamps. What I find interesting is he disclosed this dump to Troy Hunt. So that's Have I Been Pwned, if you're not familiar.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, like, it sounds like he has a relationship with Troy Hunt already a bit.
Yeah, he
from
said
another
he had,
dump.
like, existing contact with him. Yeah.
Yeah, so fortunately I'm not seeing it in here. But he hides the date information. He uploads the dump, but we don't know when he did it. And I mean, if he did this dump before whoever kind of emailed all the clients and dumped the database publicly, if he did that before, then he would clearly be in the wrong for like hacking them and then sending all the information over to Troy Hunt. I was curious to see if Troy Hunt had any thoughts on that, but he basically didn't comment on, like, there's a couple tweets about this, but
it was just about anything from him. Yeah,
no, it was just about them being ahead of the media on it or whatever, like, which is fair since it looks like he got the dump from the person who did it.
Yeah,
which, I mean, it's possible that's what happens frequently for him, so maybe not, but it's, I mean, I don't really buy the fact that it was somebody else who just happened to be doing this at the same time and happened to decide to email all of SlickWraps clients telling them about the GDPR stuff just a couple days after this guy did his test. Like, it's far too coincidental. Technically, I have no proof, and he doesn't admit it. I just don't believe it.
Yeah. Taking from chat from Malgod, well, that makes him Indian Project Zero. I think that's absolutely a fair comparison. This is kind of similar to that situation in a way.
Well, no, Indian Project
not
Zero
exactly.
though didn't actually commit any crimes.
Yeah,
they
just
released
dropped
the
an
exploit, which may be a bit questionable to do.
Yeah, I'm gonna back
this
on that a little bit. Yeah, no, it's not quite the same situation, but the moral ethics are kind of in the same questionable bucket,
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah. But I guess we'll move on from that. There's a lot of drama around it, but I think we've touched on everything.
Touched on what
with
matters
that.
with it.
Yeah. So we'll get into a McAfee post, and this is about model hacking.
They say model hacking. This is your adversarial attacks against AI.
Yeah, they basically made a new term.
They said that they felt like that in another post where they defined model hacking. They say they basically just felt that talking about adversarial attacks was just too opaque, essentially. So they call it model hacking.
Yeah. But it basically talks about hitting ADAS, which I think is that automated driving assistance systems. Is that what that stands for? I couldn't actually find it. I didn't write it down. But...
advanced driver assistance system, or driver assist systems. In particular, they kind of look at the Tesla stuff here, which
old Tesla stuff, to be fair. I do want to say that.
Yeah, so older. They do even mention that 2021 isn't vulnerable to what they found. But we've talked about kind of adversarial attacks before. Especially during our first 10, 11 episodes. We covered it quite a few times.
Yeah.
My favorite ones, though, are always those ones that involve something physical. It's pulled off in the real world. It's not just... because there are a lot of attacks that kind of assume you're able to compromise the images being looked at, or the frames themselves, to add these adversarial changes to the image. Whereas what they do here is they essentially... they play around with the idea of adding stickers to signs. So one of the examples here is this kind of weird pixelated stuff on the top and bottom of a stop sign, which makes it get classified as a added lane sign. But they kind of go further and they play around just with different changes that could be made. And just seeing how things get impacted, how things are interpreted, just weird little blocks around on the speed limit. And it looked like they were trying to get speed limits to be understood improperly.
Yeah, I think they tried to make 35 85.
Yeah, which is what they did, and they kind of worked it out to what's kind of the minimal change that we can make. And they came up with this 35 limit where they added just this 2-inch strip of black electrical tape to the kind of middle prong of the 3 to kind of just extend it out. And that was enough to have it detected as an 85.
Yeah.
So this is technically against... so this is the IQ 3, I want to say it was. I have to go back up and find it. Yeah, IQ 3 system, which was used by Tesla up until 2016 in their Model S and their Model X. So it's a real issue, but this is also augmented, I believe, by GPS information.
Yeah.
Which kind of limits the applicability of actually doing this. Because if they've already seen this sign, it's going to ignore this, new change. If they haven't seen the sign before, or a sign in that location before, then it's going to, treat it as legitimate and actually speed up, which is what they demonstrated doing. But there are some other defenses kind of in place to prevent those sorts of attacks based on, I believe, OpenStreetMap's data, which includes some of the speed limit stuff.
And I think another thing that's worth mentioning is the newer Tesla stuff has absolutely no sign recognition at all. So
yeah,
this is only
GPS.
an attack you can pull off on the mobilized stuff. The new Teslas aren't even this isn't even really a consideration for them. But yeah, so they say Mobileye still early in development. It won't be widely deployed for a while. But they do say that Mobileye is actually been cooperative and like, you know, interested in trying to prevent these kinds of attacks, which I thought was good. You know, this is something like we've talked about fooling classifiers a lot. And,
yeah, well, I think they mentioned that like Mobileye Q4 isn't vulnerable to it, or at least these particular changes. That like or maybe it was the 2020 version also. But yeah, like they're taking steps to prevent it, which I mean, it looks like QI4. Okay, so QI3, yeah, came out 2014. I mean, it's not like the attacks were unknown then, but there's definitely been a lot more research going into it since 2014.
But one thing we've always said is like, you know, obviously these attacks are going to happen. It's a newer technology and stuff like that. But what we're worried about is, you know, companies that are going to use it that won't take it seriously as a potential like vector. And it seems like these guys, you know, Mobileye, they are, which I think is commendable. I think, you know, it's like, it's a good approach.
I mean, this is an area where lives are literally on the line.
Yeah.
So I feel like most companies are taking it at least somewhat seriously there. Partially because there are regulations about that, and partially, you know, I think people kind of recognize the seriousness of it. Whereas with a lot of applications, you don't see how serious it can be. Or maybe it just can't really be all that serious.
Yeah, I mean, it's they probably don't want to get sued. Put it that way. So, you know, it's absolutely in their best interest. But still, you know, it's worth noting because we talked about it before. One thing I will say about the article directly. Sorry, you can go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, this is like, I like the fact they went and simplified it out from just this sort of look on the stop sign with like that very pixelated image added on there. Which doesn't look anything like the lane ad sign, just for listeners who can't see that. It's just, it looks like some random pixels added to the stop sign. It's like magnets. But simplifying it down to just that little strip of black tape being enough to kind of pull it off. I think that's just kind of a fun attack too. Like, it's just, I don't know, just interesting that it'll, like, you kind of understand by extending that through, it starts to look more like an 8. It's not like it's completely inexplicable why it does so.
That area where they add the strip is like the biggest, you know, tell, even like, you know, to us between an 8 and a 3 is that like shorter, you know, middle part. I'm not a typographist or whatever, so, you know, I can't say the exact term, but yeah, like it seems very common sense that it would work that way. One thing I did want to say about the article is if I had $1 for every pun in this article, I could buy Twitch. Like, I don't know if you noticed like how many puns were in here, but man, it was, they went a little bit overboard, I think. But yeah, it was a good article. I like a lot of the like diagrams and demonstrations they had were really clear. And I like that, you know. I think this article is good overall.
I mean, it's one thing, like, I definitely have some negative opinions towards McAfee. That said, like, their research teams, and this is actually generally true with a lot of like the antivirus stuff. Like, I'm not a big fan of a lot of antivirus companies, but they do good research.
Yeah, they have really smart guys on the research teams for sure. Like, I think Kaspersky is another one where we've seen a lot of good research come out of them in the past couple of years. So, yeah, do want to give some credit there. Up next, we do have an Edge POC that was put out. So this was done by Bruno Keith. This targets Chakra cores. So for those of you that aren't, you know, familiar with Edge, which, you know, wouldn't be too surprising because it's not really used that much, but Edge, for, you know, since its release, has run on the Chakra core engine for like JavaScript and stuff like that. It's recently been switched over to use Chromium, so it's received that, you know, that nickname of Edgium just to kind of distinguish it. But, you know, Chakra's dying, and he found an issue in Chakra core and released a POC for it for CVE 2020-0767. Now, this is more of a shout out because I can't go too much in depth on it because it is just a POC that triggers a crash. It is an exploit, but it's not a weaponized exploit. And even the CVE has like no details about what even the bug type is. And I'm not I'm not familiar enough with browsers to confidently say exactly what's happening here. My guess, and I think your guess is as well, is that it's a type confusion issue. Just because type confusion is extremely common in browsers, this looks like code that has triggered previous type confusions I've seen. And it doesn't seem to really do much with the garbage collector, which is like the other most popular issue I see. So I'm thinking it's probably a type confusion. Not 100% sure though. But I did want to shout it out because it could be a fun research thing to try to exploit if you're into browser stuff.
Yeah,
So,
like this is definitely one of those areas that you would have to, like this proof of concept, you're not going to figure out exactly how this works just by looking at it. You're going to have to go ahead and run it and see what happens kind of in the browser, see where the crash happens from, and then you'll probably be able to figure out a bit more.
Yeah, you'll have to do some root cause analysis on it for sure.
But yeah, I did agree. Like my thought was it's probably some sort of type confusion going on here. But can't really say too much.
The main reason I wanted to shout this out, honestly, is not with Chakra, but with WebKit, with JSC. I actually did something similar to this. I took a POC that was, just as like obscure and like at a source level glance. And I actually did, bring it into the debugger, do some root cause analysis, and take it to like a full arbitrary read-write exploit. It took me like probably a few weeks of working on it for like a long time, like probably like I want to say like 50 hours total. So it took a lot of work to do, but I learned a lot doing it, and it was a lot of fun. So yeah, I like shouting
your
out
first
these types
exploit.
Of issues.
You learn a lot doing it too.
Yeah. So like I want to say like this will help you learn a lot because you'll need to struggle through it. There's no way to cheat on this. There's no public write-ups about it. There's
until somebody does a public write-up.
That's right. Yeah, I know. But like, you could be kind of the first one to do that. You could gain that experience of looking at it and then also do a write-up for it. So like, there's kind of like that two-pronged approach you can do with it. So, definitely wanted to shout it out. But yeah, we'll move into some research because I can't touch too much more on that at the moment. And our first research topic is GadgetProbe. So
which
this
is
was
a tool
done by
release.
Bishop Fox. Yep, Burp Suite plugin, I think specifically, and this intends to solve the problem of trying to debug Java deserialization exploit gadget chains. Specifically, he narrows in on ones generated by Why So Serial. Obviously, a play on Why So Serious.
That's more of he was inspired by one out of Why So Serial.
Okay.
So the thing worth mentioning here, deserialization. In some languages, you have these universal chains. If you deserialize, this set of text, you'll get remote code execution. Ruby has a chain like that. But Java, for example, does not have a chain like that, as far as I'm aware. Instead, you kind of have to be aware of, actually, Java might, now that I'm thinking about it. There are some things kind of in the core of Java, but maybe they get patched. I'm not sure. Either way, like there's generally kind of an issue where you need to understand all of the libraries that you actually have access to and are actually loaded into the memory space of the application. So when you're writing your deserialization gadgets, it'll deserialize and you'll know like, hey, did this class actually deserialize to something, or what went wrong when you're trying to debug it. So what this tool tries to do is it takes advantage of the fact that a DNS lookup will be performed when two URL types are compared. So he used kind of the class names as being URLs that were being looked up. Should show it. I thought it showed it somewhere in here. Yeah, I guess this image probably can't see too well.
Yeah, it's too zoomed out.
I tried zooming in here, but now I can't find it.
It'll just scale it, yeah.
Yeah, well, you can kind of see, like, it's, just brute forcing some of the classes to see what, if something does deserialize properly, then it'll create a DNS request. So as long as you're able to see the DNS request being made, you're able to deal with
You
Or
can
you're
kinda use
able
it as
to
an
start
oracle.
knowing what classes you can use, and what classes you can look at to try and find code execution. Out of chat, Mel got a lot of web vulnerabilities come from serialization. I think PHP had one too. Every language that does serialization is generally going to be vulnerable to deserialization attacks like this. PHP does not have a universal gadget though. PHP, you need similar to this, you need to know all the classes that are available and find one that you can target. There's nothing in the core of PHP that you can use to get code execution via the unserialization.
Yeah, I think
that's
deserialization's been kind of growing as an issue too.
Yeah,
being looked at.
It's been one of those issues that has had a very slow growth. I think I remember maybe around, I want to say 2009-ish was the first time I started taking note of it. But serialization, I think, has just become more popular to use also. And now people are starting to see like a lot of issues with using deserialization, serialization versus using more like just a simpler protocol or something, or a simpler file format.
Yeah.
But yeah, PHP has had a lot of serialization issues, but every language that has serialization has had serialization issues.
I think part of the reason it's grown is like, like we were talking about earlier, XSS and SQLI and some of those, low-hanging fruit issues are starting to die off because of the frameworks and stuff like that. So I think deserialization is kind of looking to be that next gold mine of the vulnerability type of the decade, I guess, to look for. The early 2000s and stuff like that. XSS and SQLI was like the thing to look for. You could find it almost everywhere. But getting into like the 2010s, they started disappearing, and I think this is where you start seeing, the rise of deserialization bugs, and that's why we're starting to see more of them now and more research into them.
Yeah, I definitely don't think I'd necessarily give it bug of the decade, but I mean, we definitely had a rise in research into deserialization issues after the Jackson data bind stuff a few years back. Because everybody was using Jackson data bind, like the Java stuff. So it was a JSON serialization protocol, so it actually kind of was a simpler thing, but it would essentially just deserialize the JSON and turn it into objects. So a little bit different than what's kind of built in, but a lot of applications were using it, and you could deserialize into some of the like sun.core or whatever, the core Java libraries or classes, which did result in code execution. So you had a ton of applications with a really easy exploit chain. And after that, I've kind of seen more about serialization. I mean, I was definitely seeing it before also.
Yeah.
But
it's kind of risen in the last couple of years for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely something. I mean, until people learn not to use serialization at all, which probably isn't going to happen, or to use type check serialization, it's going to be around for a while.
Yeah. So I do want to mention there is actually a GitHub link to his work. It's the repo is named GadgetProbe. So the code is out there. It's not just the blog post. If you're looking at deserialization stuff or whatever.
Yeah, and this is just a tool that's going to help you with doing that. It's not going to do any automated exploitation.
Yeah. So yeah, did want to shout that out. Our next research point is CopyCat, controlled instruction level attacks on enclaves for maximal key extraction. So this one is getting pretty technical. This one's getting to like more of our technical topics. So over the years, we've seen like a lot of side channels attacks, especially on things like crypto. And the most common side channel that you'll see is timing attacks. And this
power's pretty common too.
Yeah, differential power analysis is another one. And this paper talks about an attack on secure enclave isolated code. And more specifically, being able to determine the exact number of instructions executed in this secure enclave. And how that basically works is they establish a channel to count the number of interrupts. And the reason this is useful is there's a key observation that interrupts can force the enclave to advance exactly one instruction at a time, due to kind of a, I guess, design flaw.
Well, so it's based around the Apex.
Apex timers.
Yeah, it's the Apex timer interrupt. So having a very short timer interrupt will result in it only, going one instruction at a time. Just so it's mentioned, SGX does disable single stepping through like code in the secure enclave. They don't allow you to do that, so that just won't work. You do have to use this other idea to try and run just one instruction at a time.
Yeah. So obviously why this is useful is you can basically fingerprint paths to determine which path was taken and which ones weren't.
Yeah, and I will mention there has been other research. They don't touch on it too much in this paper, about kind of using this trace information in order to determine or in order to leak information like RSA keys or DSA keys, or ECDHE or DS, various algorithms. I just see RSA. Oh, there it is. ECDSA. Yeah. So they cover, or they at least link out to the other papers there that have kind of this sort of attack or being able to leak this information out of it. Key recovery using partial information. And what I thought was interesting was that the attack, one of them, only requires knowledge of the least significant bits of the key. I don't know. I thought it was interesting that it didn't even require like the full key recovery to figure things out. And it talks a little bit about where it discovers or where it's able to find paths. Because obviously a lot of crypto code is written in a way that they try to limit, or in a way that it'll execute in constant time. Which then is much harder to kind of figure out if you have kind of the same instruction count across all the branches, for example. But yeah, in this case, I thought it was interesting just that it didn't actually require very much information to be leaked to be able to figure out a lot. As long as you could kind of leak it multiple times. So it required multiple traces, but they were able to break, or with a single trace on an RSA key. You could also kind of leak information from RSA, which is kind of the single trace. But yeah, the gist of it is really simple to understand. Using that Apex little interrupt, you're able to count the instructions that were taken. And using that information, as Spectre mentioned, you can kind of fingerprint what branches were taken and determine the code that was followed and whether or not it was a 1 or a 0, essentially, that it was operating on at that moment on the basis of how many instructions were taken.
Now, I do want to go a little bit more into how that works. So just that alone, I don't think would have been enough to do the single stepping. So they do abuse the APIC timer interrupts, like you were saying, to pause it at given intervals. But they also combine that with something else. They combine that with the ability to ignore zero-step events, which they can get by querying the accessed bit in the page table entry mapping for the code page. So they can set it to an interval that's lower than what would be typically required to execute one instruction, but then they can also ignore the ones that don't result in a new instruction being executed by checking that accessed bit. So that's how they can kind of get that more fine-grained interrupt on each instruction. I think that is
that's a fair point. They also actually, this is just kind of an aside, but they did also notice this microarchitectural optimization.
Yep.
That was called macro fusion. Now, I'm not sure if if they named it that or if that was a name already given to this, but they mentioned that this is kind of the first time they're able to observe this microarchitecture optimization, which is essentially combining certain common instruction pairs into a single micro-op, which I just thought that was kind of a interesting side note.
They said that to their knowledge, they're the first paper that's actually looked into it. And they said the reason they had to look into that is it could be important for automated techniques that balance code paths, which is one of the mitigations that they talk about near the end of the paper that can be used against this type of attack. So they mentioned two. They mention balancing the code branches, like we were saying, so that it's harder to get unique fingerprints from instruction counts on which paths are taken. Which is actually something I was thinking about when I first read this paper. At first glance, I thought it might not be that useful, precisely due to a reason like that. And then the other approach they can take is, basically preventing the abuse of those interrupts and trying to detect like malicious usage of interrupts to try to establish that side channel. That being said, I don't know how they would do that one. I think the balancing of code branches would probably be easier.
Yeah, well, that's something that's already done, because that also has a little bit of timing attack aspect to it also.
Yeah,
and that's also the constant time implementation. Like, I mean, it's not unheard of to do things like that already, so it makes sense to kind of suggest that here too.
Yeah. So, what makes this cool is it's not only a high granularity, like you're literally getting it at the instruction level, but it's also highly deterministic. Whereas with timing attacks, you end up having a lot more noise, and you have to pull off like a lot of attacks and then kind of, use the data from all of them to try to get more useful information.
Yeah,
this one, it's a lot more. Yeah, it's a lot more deterministic. This attack. One thing that's worth mentioning though is this doesn't really help for trying to leak data. It's more for like code. Like they have the little chart. I think you had it on the page. Which page was it on? But you had a little chart. But they say like theirs is mostly for hitting code, not data. A lot of the ones we've talked about in the past are for hitting both. This one, you kind of scrolled past it there. Yeah, that table right there. So their attack is against code, not code and data, which is something like, some of the, flush and reload attacks they have listed there, for example.
Yeah, which is fair given that, they're instruction counting.
Yeah.
I mean, you can leak a little bit of data information, as we do talk about them doing. But you're not going to be leaking very much. Like, you're not going to leak full secrets that way, unless the secret's like a bit or two.
Yeah. But this is a pretty good paper. It has a good balance of some of those higher level explanations for people who aren't like, super into the low level, how like the secure enclave works and how cryptographic side channels work. But they also do have some of those details for people who can understand all the crazy math behind it. So, it has a little bit of both for people who are interested in that. But yeah, overall, pretty cool attack. And one of the more novel ones we've seen that has more of a practical implication, I think.
Yeah, I liked it for that. I mean, I don't follow enough of the crypto papers to know that's really novel or not, but I thought it was kind of neat and cool to talk about. So It's definitely the first time we've covered this sort of attack on here.
Oh yeah, for sure. Our last white paper is MEUZZ, which is Smart Seed Scheduling for Hybrid Fuzzing. That stands, what they say it is Machine Learning Enhanced Hybrid Fuzzing System. I just want to say, can we stop with these silly names? Like using like, parts of the middle
let
of
them
words
do that.
into
That's
acronyms.
Coming up with a cool name is, that's the only fun part of their jobs, I imagine.
But is MEUZZ a cool name? Come on. Like, they're using the two Z's from the middle of fuzzing, and it's just weird.
Well, so actually, I do believe they base this off of another fuzzer, which did a very similar thing in terms of its naming.
Okay.
I want to say they even cite it. I don't see it at a quick glance. I'm not going to look too hard for it. But I believe they did kind of follow the naming of somebody else with this one. That said, it's worth mentioning hybrid fuzzing, just gotta be clear, is fuzzing, but you add in an extra step of concolic execution, which is essentially, if you're familiar with symbolic execution, where you just kind of step through the code and kind of manually do the registers, but don't really have any input to it. Just kind of what the registers would be doing and everything, not having the full execution. Plus a little bit of having some of the concrete execution data from the run. So you can actually know what would actually happen given the input. So it's basically your fuzzing input, plus doing a little bit of analysis on the fuzzing input, doing some symbolic execution to look at what paths were taken with that data that is there. in order to kind of decide what branches to take next, or in order to determine how branches were reached. So what MEUZZ does is it adds in machine learning with that. So it will, whereas other things might use a more heuristic base, like looking for just having a smaller code with like the next generation with how it's going to mutate the test. It'll look just for smaller code, or perhaps it's just going to look for greater code coverage. In this case,
is probably the most common one, yeah.
Yeah, so in this case, they tried to use machine learning, so it doesn't have a single rule. It just kind of decides on its own intelligently, questionably intelligently. And I have some, I do want to say some doubts about the practicality of this one and its actual application. But I mean, it is research, but they focus on just undefined behaviors, and they found in 24 hours of running this, they found 30 undefined behaviors. Possibly more. I'm not sure if that's 30 that they actually filed as bug reports versus how many were benign. But, oh no, the fact that they didn't use a bit more than just undefined behavior. Well, okay, I guess they do have some leaks and stuff that were used, but generally speaking, they use the number from their potential undefined behaviors.
Yeah. I do find it interesting they used UBSAN, but not something like, at least I didn't see them using like ASAN. They don't seem to have ASAN listed there, which is kind of weird, because ASAN is definitely like used more than UBSAN probably. So, like, in terms of the
they
results,
mentioned doing some manual analysis and using ASAN there.
Okay.
That's on, what page is this? Page 17.
Okay. But I mean, I do want to say, like, in terms of their results, I do like how they compared their fuzzer against other popular common fuzzers, like AFL, for example. They didn't compare, like, we've seen some fuzzing papers before that have compared to fuzzers that are more like hobbyist fuzzers. These ones seem to be, comparing with, pretty popular ones that are used often. So I like that aspect. The aspect I was kind of questionable about on, though, was the programs they actually tested it against. So those of you who are watching can actually see the little chart there. They tested against TCP dump, obj dump, readelf, stuff like that. These are all like fairly non-complex userland programs, I want to say, that have existed for a while. They obviously discovered issues in them, and when we talk about fuzzers, what we ask is, does it find issues? And according to this chart, they do. In some cases they actually end up finding just as many, if not more, issues than AFL. But
they find undefined behavior, not necessarily.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, that's more where my issues come in. Like, yeah, they're definitely finding issues. And perhaps I just have a misunderstanding over the issues that were being found, because, I mean, it looks like they're not looking for crashes, specifically just undefined behavior.
Yeah. I think what my issue is, even more so than that, is like, I think there needs to be a more diverse set of targets before it can be said if this is actually viable or not. Like, when you're talking about fuzzers, the two biggest things that you're talking about when you're talking about fuzzers is browser and kernel stuff. I wonder how this will break down when it comes to that.
There's a lot of people that do fuzz these random tools on Linux too. So some like TCP dump, like, I mean, that is a worthwhile attack surface, just because you're going to use that if you're, say, going to attack an incident responder. TCP dump to start getting some logs, and oh look, I now have control over the entire log. Or like, I now have control because they even looked at the traffic. I've definitely seen attacks like that happen during like player versus player CTFs. Where you'll target, because people will watch to see incoming exploits. So they can toss it back. So, exploit what they're using to watch that with. But yeah, I do agree. Like, there's a bit of a question over what they're using, but I think to some extent it's fair. They're just choosing some small programs that they can run really quickly, because they did only run this for 24 hours, and a lot of people will leave fuzzers going longer than that.
A lot longer, yeah.
So I think it's somewhat fair to just use some small things to see if does it detect issues at all. And that's what it proves. It doesn't necessarily show that's finding a bunch of novel issues in something that's been well fuzzed. But for research, I mean, they're not presenting this as a new commercial fuzzer. I'm willing to give them a pass on that.
I should rectify what I was saying earlier with like browser and kernel. Why I brought those two specifically is it seems that's where a lot of the cutting edge stuff is going into, is browser especially. A lot of the cutting edge fuzzing is happening there, so that's why I kind of wanted to see if, at least try to target that. But they didn't. I'm just that's just something that I would have like wished to see is a bit of a more diverse set of targets for their results.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of also just the speed of the fuzzer too.
Mm-hmm.
Because it does these extra steps like the concolic execution. That's definitely going to be limiting the speed, and with kernel, with browser, you've already got a huge overhead just needing to execute like the browser and stuff again, or needing to bring the kernel back up.
I will say, I think, at least in terms of one of the things they wanted to keep in mind when they were doing this was actually solving, like, the big thing is how do you know which seeds have the most potential to cover interesting paths and which ones to throw out, right? And that's where like they kind of kept in mind that they wanted it to be fast. They didn't want to end up bottlenecking the fuzzer with that. So I do think it would be cool to see it work there. So like I think this is kind of neat in terms of
maybe
concept.
You could work on applying it to it.
Maybe I could. Yeah, maybe that'll be my idea. No. I mean, yeah, I think it's cool in terms of concept, and the white paper is definitely like good. I don't want to take away from it. I just think the result set. It would have been cool to see it against more targets. I do have a question though, spawned from this paper for you. I mean, I think we've covered another paper recently that's kind of been pushing to integrate AI with fuzzing. I think it was more on like I think Kobe tried to do like the exploit generation and stuff. Although I can't remember how much.
I don't think that was really AI though.
Yeah, I think there was something else that I'm thinking of that had trying to push that in there. But do you think that like AI integration is going to be like the next groundbreaking thing for fuzzing, like the next thing that makes it cutting edge?
I don't know. I mean, so AI really just is, in a sense, just applied statistics. And then the problem is that if fuzzing is generally random data, so you're going to expect a somewhat normal distribution. So I'm not sure how much AI is actually going to be able to pull out of just the random stuff. Now, that said, AI has been very good at discovering kind of connections that people completely miss. And fuzzing obviously doesn't look at that at all. So it's not like it doesn't make sense to let AI kind of look for those patterns that, one, we're not going to notice, and two, fuzzing isn't even looking for at all, and seeing if that will help at all.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say that I think AI is going to take over with fuzzing. I do think it's an interesting area that I just don't know if it's actually going to be
more,
it's really useful, or if it's just going to be, no, this is too random. Yeah, I mean, I think we might see more AI when it comes to static analysis.
What do you mean there? Like, in terms of what?
Well, in terms of just analyzing a binary for issues. AI might be more capable of discovering issues just in the static application by knowing other issues that have existed.
Okay, so like feeding it like a data set of like previous vulnerabilities,
and now that I
pulling
mentioned
out patterns to try to find it.
Yeah, and now that I mentioned that, I think the fuzzer you're thinking of was the JavaScript engine fuzzer that trained on the regression test cases.
That's what it was. You're right. Man, you have a better memory than
Well,
me.
I just remembered since I was mentioning training that brought it back up since that was its key thing. And I think there's room, like at least that one, because it focuses on training on some of the code in order to generate more code. I think that has more potential, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know. I think it's just something we need to research. Like, and it's worth looking at it, seeing how it actually helps or not.
Yeah, I think the this is like I don't think they're going to stop here. I think they're going to do more research on top of this and look more into it.
Oh no, I mean everything needs
AI.
Like AI is how you get funding to do research.
We got to implement blockchain in our fuzzers to get even more funding.
You already have blockchain fuzzers.
True. But yeah, that's all we have on that paper. We're going to start moving into some shout-outs. We do have a few of those. We'll start off with pwn.college, which was your first shout-out.
Yeah, which is a nice domain. I saw this last night. I'm not sure exactly when. But the idea of it is a exploit development course of sorts. Looks like it's offered at the University of Arizona, or it's what's used by the University of Arizona.
One of their courses.
Yeah, CSE 466.
Yeah.
Whatever course that is. But I don't know, I looked at it. My initial thought was it looked all right. Looked like they had some information, but I looked at it again this morning and I've kind of changed my mind. Like, it looks like there's a lot of very surface level things here that they just kind of gloss over, like this kernel security topic.
The kernel security, to be fair, that is probably the most vague one that they have. And, that is probably the hardest module they have to cover as well, just because of how
but I mean,
is.
they do it in 18 slides.
Yeah.
That's it. They do include further reading. They do cover a lot of kind of the core topics that are relevant. Like in the heap one, they talk about some of the different heaps that are out there. The depth, though, in a lot of these maybe isn't there. Nonetheless, I do think it's worth pointing out that it's just a new resource that's there to kind of take a look at and see if it helps you. Sometimes it's just useful to have a different explanation. I felt like the heap one ended up spending a lot of time just on the old unlink attack, which, okay, fair enough. And then they spend a very little bit of time talking about, like, in this case, House of Force, House of Spirit.
One slide per house. Yeah.
They don't even cover all the houses. They link out, though, again, to like the usual recommendations for learning about that, like shellfishes, how to heap. So, I mean, it definitely links out to other resources that are useful and are good resources. I just kind of... I don't know. I feel like it's a real mixed bag. Some of it's really good, some of it's not, but it is kind of actively being developed.
Yeah, that's absolutely worth stipulating, is they even have, point 3 on their page. Some of the module challenge sets are missing concepts, and like it's still like working on trying to improve it. They just wanted to open source it to get it out there. Release early, release often. Philosophy, but yeah, they say it's in beta. They're still working on it, so I think over time this can be made better. And it's always good to have more resources for jumping into exploitation and stuff like that. So
yeah, like being able to see other ways that things are, like just seeing somebody else describe it. And one of the things I appreciated here was just like in the ROP section, like it's not just the utter basics of stuff. Like they do talk about kind of the classic. Just having everything on the stack, but obviously these days 64-bit, you've got to be able to set those registers. So it at least approaches that, which a lot of resources skip. So like it's not bad, it's just inconsistent in my opinion. But I think it's worth kind of just shouting out like, hey, it's there, it's new. Take a look, see if you benefit from it.
Yeah. And then you also have another shout out with the microcontroller readback protection bypasses and defenses.
Yes, that's NCC Group put out some research. Actually, they've put out a few different things, but this is just a shout out. We're not going to cover it. It's nothing novel. It's just the focus of some hardware protection and defenses bypasses and defenses, not protections and defenses. That essentially just prevent you from reading out internal storage. Just an overview. Very, I don't know if I'll necessarily say comprehensive, but it covers quite a bit. Covers it fairly well. So dropping this as a link to check out if that interests you.
Yep. I have a few shoutouts as well. One that I noticed was from AFLplusplus. I saw on Twitter that people were saying some of the AFLplusplus documentation can be really hard to follow for people who aren't already well versed in like the fuzzing world. So they kind of, took a step in the direction of trying to make it more accessible to beginners. So they put out this tutorial about how to fuzz libxml2 with AFLplusplus. So they don't include like how to build AFLplusplus. They, leave that to the reader, but they talk about like, how you can use it and how to get started running AFL. And I think that's pretty cool, especially with fuzzing. It can be really hard to break into because it's got its own, terminology. Like you can make a dictionary of all the fuzzing terminology and stuff like that. And because of that, it makes it hard to break into. So whenever I see resources that are kind of trying to make it more accessible to like noob friendly readers, I always like, kind of putting that out there because, I know firsthand how hard it can be trying to break into looking into fuzzing. So
and I will mention they do also have, the build and install page, which, maybe isn't terribly deep, but, it's there to help.
It seems like it's one of those projects that might actually not be hell to build because it looks like
they at least have the
file.
at least the Docker file. Docker's made things quite nice.
Yeah, because that is one thing with major projects sometimes, man. Sometimes it's like super hellish to actually build because the build instructions are just very vague. And
on that note, though, sometimes you can find other people writing Docker files too that can be quite helpful.
Yeah.
Although, disclaimer, don't trust random Docker files. Do give them a read. Make sure you know what you're executing because that is executing as root in general.
Yeah. Good little tip at the end there. My last shout out is ALF Security. They put out some conference slides for some talks they gave at Black Hat EU, CCC, and OffensiveCon. And most notably, two of those presentations, the Black Hat and OffensiveCon ones, were about booting iOS on QEMU. Obviously, this is like a really cool topic, just because iOS has always been famously hard to do research on without at least an already jailbroken device, just because of the level of access required, and Apple's always been proprietary with their stuff, so it won't run easily without using their hardware. And this has kind of led to some negative security practices. I think we talked a little bit about it before, but researchers basically have to hoard 0 days just to continue their research, which is not good. But this is kind of trying to take a step in the direction of trying to solve that issue with being able to boot iOS and QEMU. And obviously, if you can run it in QEMU, you don't need Apple hardware necessarily to start digging into iOS. So they talk about the process and some of the struggles they had of trying to get iOS to boot. So, they talk about, I think they wanted to originally boot a kernel without doing any patches. That didn't end up working out. They did end up having to do patches. And I think part of that was the secure monitor. They couldn't allow that to run for whatever reason. It had some architectural support or something that they couldn't easily implement. So for now, they don't have any secure monitor support, and the kernel has patches, so it's not completely untainted. If you want to do vulnerability research, that could be an important factor for you. It introduces noise. But yeah, they talk about some of the struggles with that. They talk about getting user mode applications running and ultimately running a shell and allowing task for PID 0 access to anyone in user mode. For now, it seems to only support iOS 12.1, which targets iPhone 6s, but it seems they do want to eventually try to add support for more versions in the future. But yeah, this just seems like a really cool project, and I think the slides are... there's a ton of them, dude. Look at that scroll bar, man. It can't get any smaller. So they've got a lot of details about some of the process they had to go through to get it running. And they actually do have code up at a GitHub link. I'll actually bring it up on the stream as well, just so that it's there. They have a repository here, XNU QEMU ARM64. So, you can look at that and look at trying to use it if you're interested in iOS research. But yeah, I thought it was definitely worth a shout out because it looks like a really cool project. So, yeah.
The slides do look interesting. This is the first time I'm taking a good look at them.
Yeah, they're very detailed with good
diagrams. It looks like they released a video too, I believe.
Yeah, they have a demo video out, I think.
Well, was it? Let me go back.
I think it was in the offensive con. They had some MP4s.
Yeah, they had some
demos.
MP4s. Was it just demos?
I think it was just demos, but I might be
okay. No,
wrong.
You might be right. I didn't actually watch any of them. I was kind of hoping that might have been more presentation. But I suppose it's definitely possible that's demo.
Yeah, I'm just gonna take a quick look. Offensive 20. It's only 40 megabytes.
Yeah,
so,
it says demo in both of them.
Yeah.
So yeah,
but,
never mind on that.
Yeah, but still,
Offensive Con does put their videos out, so we can expect that at some point here.
So yeah, definitely worth a shout out. But yeah, that pretty much concludes all of our topics and shout outs and stuff like that. We'll conclude the show by saying you can go and check out our YouTube channel for previous VODs. We also put the podcast episodes up on Spotify,
Apple, yeah, Google,
all those,
Pocket Cast, basically whatever. All the links are in the description. That includes this Twitch video is also kind of available during that 24 hours before we release all the audio sources tomorrow. You are still able to watch this there. Yeah.
We also have a Discord you can come check out if you want updates when we're going to be streaming and stuff like that, which we also put out on Twitter. But yeah, so we will see you guys again next Monday, which we will be live with episode 31 at the same time, 3 o'clock Eastern. And yeah, we will see you guys then.